What up, podcast fans?
We're back. We're worldwide. We are here.
Eritrea is worldwide. She's actually recording this episode in Puerto Rico. Our guest is Jazz Sethi, founder of the Diabesties Foundation. She's calling from India. So we are a fully globally integrated team today. And boy, is this an interview. Boy, I'm hyped. I'm hyped. I was ready to run through a brick wall. Jazz is an incredibly inspiring and eloquent speaker. I was ready to fall right in line and volunteer at the Diabesties Foundation. Count me
I'm
in.
going to. I was really just thinking about that. First of all, I was impressed with her the moment I met her. I've had the opportunity and privilege to hear her speak multiple times at different conferences. And what an incredible gift to the diabetes online and real community that she is to India and to all of us on the gram, because there's just so much we can learn from her. And her story and about diabetes. Like this episode, I can't wait for everybody to hear it.
I think the big takeaway for me is if you think you're that different than somebody who's living in India, you are wrong. Because I think we being born in the US, me being born as a cis white male is like I won the genetic lottery just right off the bat. And seeing the disparities, we have a lot of problems here in the US, especially around our healthcare. But Jazz's and her constituents and the people that she serves in India have way bigger problems. When you're talking about somebody whose household income every month is $40 American, diabetes care, comes secondary to food and shelter. And so, it's very difficult, the problems that some of her, the folks that she is serving deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so to hear her talk about that, and to hear about the impact that she and the Diabesties Foundation are currently having on 400 children and teens with diabetes to supply them insulin and test strips is massive, massive, massive. When you're talking about 400 people who may not even be alive if not for them. So I think that's a really important thing to think about. I am fascinated by, the continued growth of India. And I'm really interested in continuing to serve how the nearly 100 million people in a few years. I think by 2030, they estimate 100 million people in India will have diabetes. I'm interested in helping them out. And I think that, we're pretty ahead of the game in terms of a lot of things. And we can we can impart our knowledge and wisdom and money to people in India to help them dramatically. So we've included a lot of links in the show notes. And I want you guys to, if you can, find a way to support Jazz in her efforts. I think you'll find it really easy after you hear this amazing interview with Jazz Sethi. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Diabetics Doing Things. We are telling the amazing stories of people with diabetes from all over the world, and all over the world is the key message here today, because not only is our guest Jazz calling from Ahmedabad, India, but Eritrea is also in Puerto Rico right now. So we are all over, although I guess Puerto Rico technically is the US. We are all over the world today at Diabetics Doing Things.
Mr. Pitbull, I gotta say, all over the world. I'm Mrs. Pitbull now because I'm all over the world.
Ms. Worldwide. Awesome.
Yeah, there you
go. Jazz, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we are excited to have you. And I know you and Eritrea got to meet earlier this year at a conference. I believe it was at ADA in New Orleans, or it could have been ATTD in Barcelona.
Yeah.
Eritrea, so there it is. Eritrea is nodding now. And you are the founder of the Diabesties Foundation. You are also highly involved in diabetes advocacy in India. And I'll tell you why I was really excited for this episode, because there is a lot going on in India in terms of globalization. You guys are, so many of the Indian people have come online and joined the sort of connected world in the last few years. And along with that comes a large amount of people living with diabetes, type 1 and type 2. All the research I found showed that, India is the number 2 country in terms of population right now of people with diabetes, behind China, with like 77 million people in India living with diabetes.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think we are one of the highest populations just in terms of population. And then, of course, we have a lot of people with diabetes. And I think now more and more people are getting aware that there are things like support groups, and there are places online that we can come out and ask for support. And I'm so glad that that's happening, like, sooner than later. But there's still a lot we need to do on a ground level as well, because we do have a lot of people who have the capability of coming online and reaching out, but then we also have that segment of the population which cannot come online and ask for help. So I think it's that fine balance of trying to cater to both and make sure that we're giving support to as many people with as many needs as possible.
I love it. And I really want to dig into the work that you and your team at the Diabesties Foundation are doing. But first, let's talk about you. You live with type 1 diabetes. Let's talk about your diagnosis. How did you come to join the type 1 diabetes family?
So I actually, fun fact, I don't know if many people know this or not, but I live with two types of diabetes actually. So I have type 1, and then I also have diabetes insipidus, which is not the mellitus family of it. It's the other one. So it's again an autoimmune condition wherein my body's not producing vasopressin, which is another hormone. I basically am the anti-hormone class, clearly. But type 1 happened to me when I was 13 years old. And I think, all the same symptoms that we all go through: a lot of weight loss, a lot of thirst, going to the bathroom, and one day just going to the ER because my sugar was like really, really high. And that's when I was diagnosed, and my doctor just came in and said, yeah, she's got type 1 diabetes. And that was when I was 13, and it's been 13 years now living with the condition. And just very similarly, in 2009, I was diagnosed with type 1. And then 10 years later, in 2019, I was diagnosed with diabetes insipidus. Same symptoms. It's so funny because I was still drinking so much water. I was so thirsty, but my sugars were normal. So it was such a bizarre moment for me. Like, it was like 10 years deja vu. And I called my doctor and I was like, I'm drinking a lot of water. It's the same hyperglycemia kind of thirst. But my sugar's 128. So what's going on? And then we did a couple of tests and we were like, oh, this is, and I remember him on the phone being like, Jazz, I think you have another type of diabetes. And I was like, no way, this is not happening. But it's all good. It's just like a nasal spray that you need to take. And that's my diabetes story.
So I have so much, so one of the main symptoms of diabetes insipidus is polyuria, which is like frequent
Yes.
urination. So my question is, throughout the time that you got diagnosed with diabetes mellitus up to diabetes insipidus, like that small window, I guess a couple years, was the polyuria like constant and you were just like having the hardest time?
It wasn't, because I think it was very acute, the onset of the DI. So I was fine for 10 years, and then it actually happened like maybe I want to say a couple of days that the polyuria began. And
Wow.
so it was very, very acute, and I caught it very early. And then I had to like go in for an MRI and stuff because they had to check my pituitary gland to see
Right.
what's up. And yeah, so two types of diabetes. No one's complaining.
Diabetes is so rare. It's super, super, super rare. So just for
Yeah, and
future.
I think it's rarer to have them both together.
It is.
So quite interesting, actually.
Well, I was going to say, because I don't know a whole lot about diabetes insipidus, but I listening to you talk about your symptoms and talk about when you got your second diagnosis, were you by chance like in euglycemic DKA? Are you familiar with that term?
I wasn't. I kept thinking I was, right? Because I remember I checked my ketones as well. So, we were doing all the tests possible. And then my doctor, for some strange reason, was just like, you need to get your ADH test done, which is an antidiuretic hormone test. And that was super, super low. And that's when, we had to go into the ER again, and then get the MRI and stuff. And then there was an option again that you can take your desmopressin either through a pill or through a nasal spray or through an injection. And I was like, I am not taking another injection. We're going to do this the easy way this time. And I opted for the spray.
So you're able to then, with the nasal spray, that controls your diabetes insipidus. And then, with your type 1 diabetes, you manage with injections or pumps. So the same way everybody else.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Interesting. Well, very cool. I learned that's something I learned today and I didn't even expect. So it's excellent.
Yep.
I feel like I just know about it because Camp Sweeney. So yeah.
Yeah. Eritrea went to this diabetes camp in Texas. That's like an intense diabetes camp. And they're like very big into the science, and they do amazing things for children with diabetes. And there's a lot of people who met at that camp who are listeners to the podcast, and they're all still like crazy friends today. They're in their Facebook groups and in their group chats. So shout out to the Sweeney alumni.
For
Oh,
sure.
wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So in reading some of the articles about you, I can tell you are wired a little bit different. You take things in stride. Even today on the call, you were like, 2 types of diabetes, but I'm not complaining. Where does that attitude of kind of gratitude come from? And, being diagnosed in your teens and then re-diagnosed later, where does that come from?
I don't know. I think it's just I've always tried to be the person that finds a silver lining in situation. And it's not easy, of course, but I think now I just look at it from a place of saying that, you are gifted this life and you have to make the most of it. And I think because I come from a country like India, I'm constantly seeing that disparity is such a reality. And I've just realized that there is no place for asking questions like why me or being so upset about it, because there are people who just have it so much worse. And I think that's what motivates me so much to just try to be as grateful as possible, to be like, okay, yeah, one more diagnosis, it's fine, I'm still living, I'm still happy, I'm still breathing. I'm still privileged enough to be able to afford the treatment I can manage. And that pushes me so much to give back and to try to do more to help others. And it's just that entire thing of saying that it's probably a bad day, but it's not a bad life. And I just constantly remind myself of that.
I
And
love
just
that.
like getting inspiration from all of you from all over the world. I think that the online community has done so much to inspire me as well. So just talking to people and knowing that we're not alone in this, I think that's what makes me happy.
I love that. Often I think some of the more negative sentiment gets like, it's easy to let that creep in. You know what I mean? It's easy to get on a negative momentum or like an attitude where you start to think that everything is bad. And fortunately, like you, I'm fortunate enough to be able to have access and afford the medications that allow me to live, and there are many people that don't. But also, like,
Yeah.
that allows us to give back and to provide inspiration, provide information, provide just an opportunity to say that, yeah, there are some bad days, some really bad ones. As I say, you can't. I don't know if you can see video, but I've got like a thing of gummy bears here because I'm having a low blood sugar right now. But
Oh,
we can bounce back and still do the things that we want to do and still make it a great life.
We ball.
absolutely.
Right? So Jazz, I'm gonna be honest, after I met you in Barcelona, I was like, okay, who is this girl? Where did she come from? Because she's incredible. And so I started doing the thing that I always do, which is creeping and Googling and trying to figure out. And I saw that your dad is actually a little bit of a celebrity, and he's like a really well-known billiards player in India. So I just kind of wanted to know, just culture is so important to me and so interesting to me. How did your family handle your diagnosis, and what was that dynamic like for you guys?
It was actually, I have to say that I am so grateful for my parents' support, because they immediately were like, we're gonna do this together and you have our support. And the fact that you mentioned that, actually, so yes, my father he's a 9-time world billiards champion. So he's an athlete, right? By profession. So I don't know if you guys know of a cricketer named Wasim Akram from
I
Pakistan, who
do.
is one of the top class. Yes, right. So he's like one of the best fast bowlers in the world, and he's type 1 diabetic as well. And my father, of course, knows him. And so the first thing he did tell me, my father, when I was diagnosed, was that, okay, you have type 1 diabetes, but Wasim Akram also has type 1 diabetes, and he's a top class athlete. And I think in that moment, he was just trying to break down my diagnosis for me in the simplest way possible, to be like, and try to tell me that I'm not alone in whatever way he knew. I think that was the only other person he knew who had type 1 at the point. But he was like, you're not alone, you know? And that was so reassuring for me as a 13-year-old, scared and confused, just to be like, okay, Wasim Akram also has type 1 diabetes for some strange reason that provided me comfort. So they were extremely supportive, and I have absolutely no complaints with the way they've treated me and raised me, and always ready to try new things. When we wanted to try the Omnipod, which is still not available in India, like my mom had gone to Boston to for work, and she heard about it and she was like, we must try it. So we were like, okay, let's try it. So, they never questioned that when I was like, I really want to try the Dexcom. There was no questions asked. It's just such a beautiful family support. I know I can rely on them at any time. Um, Initially, whenever my parents travel a lot, so even though they were halfway across the world, they would call me at like 3 a.m. my time to make sure that I get up to check my sugars. So always there, and absolutely, and that kind of support just gave me so much strength and freedom to do whatever I wanted to do.
Jazz, I love that you shared what your dad did after your diagnosis, because no matter where you're from, whatever culture you're in, that is the most dad move I've ever heard. Like, hey,
Right.
I know this guy with diabetes. Like, let me connect you to him. And it's just like that I love
Exactly.
that dad is a universal language.
Totally. So
Uh,
funny.
so I know in reading about you, you were the first person in India in the entire country to receive an artificial pancreas system. So a closed loop, hybrid closed loop, DIY loop. And you worked with like some of the key opinion leaders in India who were at like the forefront of diabetes care. So what was it like to be the first person in your country wearing, breakthrough technology that, was available to the rest of the world, but was just coming available in India?
I'm very, very interested in diabetes tech as well. And this sort of happened by chance or by accident, actually, because I met with Professor Parthakar, which I'm sure everyone in the diabetes community knows. So he is sort of the clinical director for diabetes in the UK, in the NHS. But I met him at a conference when he had come to India. And then I met him again at another conference, I believe. And he was sort of looking at my graph. And, I was just talking to him about, I was suffering from a lot of lows and this and that. And he was like, why aren't you looping? And I was like, what is that? Because we hadn't heard about it in India yet. Like we heard about it very at a research paper level, but the fact that people were actually doing this was not something that any of us knew. So I immediately started Googling stuff and went onto GitHub and sort of started seeing what was out there. And he connected me to a few people actually from the UK who were my sort of fallbacks. And I kept asking them questions on how to do it. And I just was like, I'm going to go ahead and try this. And then I sort of worked with a couple of doctors in India who were at the forefront of technology. And I just informed them that, listen, I'm doing this. It's going to be interesting. And let me know what you guys think. And I set up the system and I was the first person to do it. And I'm so glad that the documentation and the sort of hype that we created around it in India has helped more people to begin looping, which was the entire point. And so I think now I've sort of set it up for a couple more people in India. It is still very, very rare to see a person looping just because you require so much tech in the first place to start that, like a CGM and a pump and things like that. But I'm very excited for the future of it. And I'm so excited that more people in India are beginning to loop as well. So many doctors don't know about it in India. Like in a couple of weeks, I'm speaking at a conference just to explain people what type 1, like what DIY looping is. So I think we still need to spread a lot of awareness about what it is and just enable people to do more to get their patients onto looping.
Wow.
With that in mind, so like you said, diabetes technology, diabetes care is emerging, and there's a lack of awareness in India about it. How often? It's like a two-part question. How often do you see like somebody else wearing a diabetes device or a CGM or injecting insulin or testing their blood sugar in public? And then number two, what are some of the barriers, right? So in the healthcare system in the US, for example, some people have insurance, some people get their insurance through the government, some through their employer, some people are uninsured, and that presents different challenges based on where you live and where you work to getting access to medication, right? So how does that work in India? So two-part question. First part, how many people do you see and how often? And second of all, like what's it like to get access to medicine and diabetes tech in India?
Right. So I think the first question, what really affects the idea that people are open about their diabetes in India specifically is the stigma. So I actually running a diabetes foundation, I still don't see too many people openly share their devices or openly take insulin. We are really trying to work with at least the kids that are in our foundation to get them to that level of confidence where they're okay with doing so. And I'll be very honest with you. Like, I used to hide my devices way back when I was diagnosed, and because I was not too comfortable sharing, because it wasn't an okay thing to do. And when I sort of broke out of that a couple of years ago, being like, I'm not doing anything wrong by showing my device, and let people I mean, you have the stares and you have the questions and you have the judgments, and I was like, screw it, I'm just gonna do this, right? I'm not doing anything wrong, and this is my life, and I'm gonna be proud about it. So now I think we're really trying to get more of people living with type 1 to be okay and comfortable with doing it, but it's not where it needs to be. So to answer your first question, I in fact don't see too many people out there. And I was so surprised because when I just went to London a couple of weeks ago in July, and I saw so many people with Libres on. And it was such a refreshing change. And I kept thinking to myself, in India, we have way more people with type 1. So I should be seeing more people. But then the other point that actually leads to your second question is, not too many people have type 1 diabetes technology, right? So a lot of people are not able to afford tech, which is also why we don't see it out in public too often. It's all on, like, insured in the UK, and as you said, in the US. But in India, we don't have insurance, firstly. So everything is, we don't have diabetes insurance, so everything is out of pocket. And it's very expensive for the normal middle class person who's getting a normal income to be able to afford, because when you have a family of four, you need to pay the other bills, and then to have this as an added thing, it's just not possible. So when it comes to answering your second question, access is a huge issue. So we do have government hospitals which do give free insulin, but the problem with that is it's all human insulin and it's all mixed insulin. So we don't have access to analogs. Diabetes tech is atrociously expensive in India for a middle class person. And we have our below, like, lower income status that can't even afford insulin. So a lot of the work we do at the foundation is to provide free insulin and free test strips, just to give them basic minimum requirement and minimum care, so that they're not dying. It's actually to that level, so they're not in DKA, so they can have some semblance of quality of life. But then we have the other extreme in India also, who can afford absolutely everything. So it's a game of extremes over here. So we don't have too many people who have tech, but the people who have tech, we need to get the stigma out so that they can actually be confident enough to show it off.
So when we're talking about having access to different things, is that because I remember when you talked in Barcelona how sometimes it can be impacted by, like, your caste and, like, what you can access, like how much money you have. So can you just talk to us a little bit more about, like, how the caste system can possibly impact a person who lives in India, and maybe what they can do to overcome that to try to get the access that they need?
Yeah, I don't think it's so much of a caste issue. It's more of just an income issue, because
Okay.
we have a lot of people below poverty line. So what we do is, when the kids that we support from the foundation, also we have an income cutoff. That's how we determine whether we support those kids or not. So it depends on what is your income bracket. And so when we're doing our due diligence about who we're trying to support, just because there are so many people in need, we need to sort of have a, like, standard operating procedure. So the thing is that we've got so many people in India who are below poverty line, or who are in a very low income bracket, who are making X amount of money per month or per year. And then we try to figure out what is the family income of that family. And then, and so the average cost, if I give it to you in dollars, is about $500 a year to support someone in India. But the average income is way less than that. So it's because everything is, like I said, out of pocket. There's no insurance, so you need to go and pay for insulin, pay for test strips. People are making, like, maybe, I want to say, there are some people who are making as little as $20-$30 a month. So it's very difficult, and we need to figure out how are we going to break that, because this is just not a sustainable thing. And that's why there's so many people who are dying in India, just because they have zero access to care. It's not sustainable care. So they might be able to afford insulin 1 month, but they may not be able to afford it the next month, because they're daily wage earners. So let's say they're out of work. Where does the money come from? So that's the issue.
Well, and I think it's when we talk about access and we talk about, price caps or copay caps here in America, have been a very popular discussion this year politically. And, fortunately for Americans over 65 who are on Medicare, now have their copays capped at $35 a month, which in America, seems like a huge win. However, if you
Mhm.
apply that to India, like you just said, that is an entire month's income for a household. So
Mhm.
it's not equal, the state to state, country to country, but the insulin that you need, you still need the same requirements. You still need the same number of test strips, the same number of syringes, the same number of pump sites. And then you start to look at care and standards of care. Yeah, no wonder no one is on a DIY loop. They are too busy trying to make enough money to feed the family, and diabetes is coming second in pursuit of number one.
Absolutely. I think that's the biggest thing. When your priorities are so different, you don't have time to think about, oh, let me try to get the fanciest tech or the newest tech. It's just as simple as, can I feed my family today? It's not even if I can get insulin, it's, can I actually feed them? And that's the type of families that we're actually working with right now. Because for them, insulin comes second. Their child, whether their child is in 500, 600, it doesn't matter. And I sort of now understand. I used to get really shocked earlier on, when I used to hear these stories. And I used to be like, what? The family doesn't care. This is negligence and this, that. But now when I'm actually interacting with those families, I understand. I understand that when you are fighting to just feed your family, you don't think about your sugars. You don't have time to think about your sugars. And then that's what deteriorates quality of life. Then that kid is going to get diabetes complications later on. So it's a systemic issue. It's not a diabetes issue at the core. It is so much bigger than that. And I can't address those issues. I mean, I can't solve those problems right now in India, but at least we can try to solve that. Okay, you focus on getting your family fed, we will focus on your insulin. That's the partnership that we're trying to have for these families.
Rob,
You're
you're muted.
mute, Rob.
Silly.
Oh my gosh, sorry.
Mr. Podcast expert. Oh my God.
Well,
Perfect.
I know I was checking my notes and I muted, and but now I know what I was going to ask, because you've been doing now, it looks like just over 4 years since you founded
That's
the
right.
Diabesties Foundation. So good, my notes are right.
Yes.
I gotta just
Good
remember
job.
that mute button's on. But for you, what was the first big, like, kind of light bulb moment for you where you said, wow, we really can make an impact, and there really is a need for the Diabesties Foundation to have a major impact in India?
So it was so interesting because I started Diabesties as just wanting to be a YouTube channel. Because as I was growing up, I kept seeing, and I was very inquisitive as a child. I still am, but I used to go on YouTube as a kid and just, Google, YouTube type 1 diabetes. And all I used to see in from India was just like, boring, not, no offense to anyone, but just boring doctors sitting, 2 hour lecture, 2 hour of them just talking about, oh, this is a science and this is the islet and this is that. And I was like, this is not interesting. I want to know more about my condition, but I'm not sitting and listening to a 2 hour long, lecture. So in 2018, I just said, you know what? I want to make learning about diabetes fun. I want to make it young. I want to make it a little glamorous, because it was so bleak and dark and, oh my God, the world is going to end. That was like the vibe. And I was like, no, that's not life though. So I said, okay, let's just make a fun YouTube channel which makes learning about diabetes fun. And honestly, at that time, I had really, really terrible diabetes knowledge myself. But I said, you know what, we're going to try. And then how that YouTube channel turned into an all out foundation, a registered foundation with all the projects, was when I actually started seeing the reality. I was very much living in a bubble till 2018, where I thought that everyone with type 1 diabetes was all happy go lucky. And then when I sort of started interacting with doctors and interacting with different networks in India, started seeing the reality, that's when the projects started coming up, the ideas started coming up, the education started coming up. And I remember very clearly a little girl came up to me and said that, you made me feel less alone after one of our meetups. And for me, that was enough. I was like, that is one person's life who we've made better. And then from there, the entire story of impact started to grow. And today, the stories that we hear, the clinical impact we are seeing, the psychological impact we are seeing, the quality of life impact we are seeing post the work we are doing is so, so profound and so impactful that I know that what we're doing is making a difference. And I keep telling my team, we've got 50 people now working at Diabesties, all who are living with type 1 diabetes all over India. And I keep telling my team that it's these stories that you need to go back to. It's these stories that are going to push you to do more. So that's the impact that helps me keep going.
I love that outlook. I think, we started here at Diabetics Doing Things to try to help one person, do 10 episodes of the pod, help one person. And if we felt like we were doing that, we were going to keep going. And, even on the days where, we're doing a little bit bigger things these days at times, but the work is harder and you're marching uphill, you have to remember back to the reason why you started and, the people who have gotten us there. So I totally resonate with that. So for you and your 50 people who are working with Diabesties across India, what goals do you guys have set for yourselves, like on the horizon? Like, what are you marching towards next? Like, what's the big milestone?
So the big milestone has been one of the flagship projects, which I did speak about in Barcelona as well. It's the Back to Basics project that we are very, very excited about, and we've seen some incredible results. We've done over 700 one-on-one counseling sessions now. We want to like legitimize that a little bit more. We want to make it easier for people to access. We want to make it like gold standard for all the doctors to like advise them to take a B2B session. So we want to work with industry to partner with healthcare professionals to be like, you take care of the insulin prescription, we'll take care of everything else. So it's a very collaborative approach that we want to do because, again, like talking about the healthcare sector in India, it's overburdened. So I understand in India where a doctor does not have more than 2 minutes to spend with the patient. But like, I think both of you so clearly know that 2 minutes is not enough for a person living with type 1 diabetes to understand about their condition. And then we also have a little bit of God complex in India where people are so scared of their doctors, so they don't have the freedom to ask them questions. So I think lived experience plays such an important role. The language plays such an important role. And we've seen, I'm not talking out of, just my own want and wishes. We've seen the impact of this. So we really want to make Back to Basics much bigger. That's the biggest goal of this year. We have a couple of resources coming out. We want to do something really fun for World Diabetes Day. We want to really open up and widen our access project. We're supporting 400 kids right now. We want to get that up to 1,000. So we're working on that. So little goals here and there. Small successes reap big rewards, as I tell all my kids as well.
Well, and I mean, you could say it's small, right? 400, you could say that that's small, but when you think about the real impact for providing 400 young people insulin, that's 400 lives that are, that they take the survival at its very core, like out of their to-do list. They don't have to wonder where their insulin is going to come from, and you guys are doing that for them. And ultimately, that's back to basics. That's really providing people with the basics that they need to live and thrive. So that is a huge measurable impact. So for us, like you're talking to us here on, all the way across the world, how can we help turn 400 into 1,000? What is the call to action that people hear who are listening to this podcast and hearing your story for the first time? What can we do to help? How can we get involved?
Oh wow, so many ways. I think just support in any way possible, whether it's financial, whether it's resources, whether it's any kind of support. I think always helps. Because like I even spoke about in Barcelona, with these 400 kids, what we're trying to do is not just provide them the insulin, but also the tools and the skills to be able to use that insulin. And I keep telling this time and again that it's not just about giving them free insulin, because I've seen so many foundations and so many people try to do good, but it's doing more harm because when it becomes just a checklist item that, oh, we've given them free insulin, it doesn't work because that kid is still ending up in DK the next month. So unless you're giving them insulin and also giving them education about what to do, how to manage it. I don't want a kid to take insulin and still be in the 500s, then what's the point? So the idea is that we're trying to give them a whole 360-degree kind of a measure, and it doesn't work all the time. We have kids who we have to teach and reteach hundreds of times. But then you also have the kids who just recently we saw our littlest, he is a 4-year-old boy who we've been supporting for 3 months now, and his A1C has come down by a whole point. He was at 8.5, he's come down to 7.5, better in range, because now the family's been coming every single Sunday and learning how to control diet, exercise, titration, injection technique. So all of this is so important. So anyone who wants to support, whether you've got some fun resources that you think we can use for our kids, or you want to support financially to help a child, if you want to adopt a child, there are a lot of ways. And I think our website has details about all of those in case they want to get in touch.
I love the adopted child option, Jazz. That is so helpful. I feel like all people with diabetes are so giving of self. And if one person to give to another can just change something for one person, like I said, that like Rob said, I think a lot of us feel that way. So what a beautiful thing that you guys have set up.
I also think it's easy for us in the West to think of India as this faraway place that, and maybe most of us here in the US won't ever go there. But the world is shifting back east, and
Yeah.
the as the millions and millions and millions of people in India come online, are getting more connected, are getting access to the internet via mobile devices for the first time. That's building community in a way that hasn't been possible in India up to date. Like the globalization that's happening in infrastructure is massive, and I think we're marching quickly towards English spoken in India as the gold standard for English worldwide because of how many people there are living in India and how a huge global position that you guys hold. And
Yeah.
it's easy for us to think of that as so far away or like so foreign. But when you see the face of a kid who has diabetes that you can actively support to have an impact in their life, it really humanizes that gap and really closes that global. It's not so far. We're not so different as our brothers and sisters in India are, who are living with diabetes. We're all also looking for, trying to live our best life, trying to find the technology mix and the medication mix to help us live well with this disease, and also make friends and share experiences and just share tips, tricks, and also just kind of like vent to each other at times. I know that the term diabesity like really is a real thing, and I think
Yeah.
being able to look across, to the other side of the world and say, hey, I have diabetes in India as well as the US, is a really important part of our growth. And, I just hope that we can continue to provide that support to reach out and connect and use the internet and use social media in a way that allows us to help each other and lend a hand, whether that's information, inspiration, or support financially. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to kind of reach out and grab our brothers and sisters overseas and bridge together.
Absolutely. So well said. And I think what you said is so true because it's never been easier to connect than it has been now. And it's never been easier to support as well. So I think leveraging that globalization and leveraging that access to technology and to social media and to connections, I think it's the perfect time. There's no time that like now. So, and as you said, right, support comes in so many ways. It's not always just financial. If you want to lend your time, if you want to educate, if you want to have some fun sessions with the kids, I mean, there's so much possible. Whether you're so at least at Diabesties, we try to look at all the stakeholders in the management. So we have something called Caregivers Council as well, because we oftentimes forget that the caregivers are such an important part of our journey, especially with younger kids. So whether there's some caregivers who want to like come in and hop on and do a session for the other caregivers, we're all a learning community. Every day, I think all of us learn something new. So it's just about using that circle, the blue circle, to continue to reach wider and grow the circle of influence and connect in ways that hasn't been possible before.
I love that. It's so exciting. I do want to ask you, I have two questions left, and I know I want to be respectful of your time, and also like it's early in the morning, and I'm sure you've got a busy Friday ahead of you. But you talked earlier about stigma, and stigma is something here in the United States. Like there is absolutely a diabetes stigma, especially around type 2. And on Instagram and such, there's lots of people making funny videos about the things that people without diabetes say to those of us with diabetes. But in India, like what do you think are the big barriers to that diabetes stigma? Is it misinformation? Is it cultural? And what would you say to someone who's experiencing diabetes stigma?
So, such an interesting question because I think it's so multi-layered in India. So, I think stigma comes from the first and foremost is lack of information, lack of awareness, literacy, and alternate therapies. That's the sort of bifurcation I would put across to it. So, the biggest thing is, of course, because diabetes is such a generic word, and I don't think we do enough of an effort to mention type. I think, yes, those of us who live with type 1 are very conscious of saying that, but even doctors, if you've noticed on Twitter or this and that, it's always just diabetes. So, generalizing diabetes first is the worst thing we can do, I feel, because uh, different diabetes have different pathologies, different physiologies, different treatments, and it's not a single word. It's not a one size fits all kind of a word. So then when somebody is talking about diabetes reversal, and you have a new family who's been diagnosed with type 1 who is desperate for a cure, and it's so easy to fall into a misinformation, to be like, yeah, my diabetes can be reversed, and go in for that. We've seen that so often here. That's why we are always telling people to mention the type of diabetes. Secondly, oh my God, I think because we are rooted in Ayurvedic culture, the amount of alternative therapies that have come up for insulin, it is shocking, it is fatal, and now people are using it as clickbait almost. Because I feel like people are just trying so hard to get rid of insulin and people are ready to try anything. And there are these quacks who are taking full advantage of that. So I think we're trying to do so much to be like, no, insulin is the only option. Second, the third thing is insulin is made the villain in India. I
Mm.
don't know if it's the same in the US, but
In
basically, I
many
think
times it is.
right, because doctors sometimes give it as a worst case scenario for those with type 2, being like, oh, if you're not taking care
Right.
of your diabetes, we need to put you onto insulin. So it becomes the worst
Or it's
case. And then
scaring them with shots. Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
I think that there is a lot of rhetoric that is held over from earlier days and early on in maybe back in the 80s, 90s of that if you're on insulin as a type 2 diabetic or a person with type 2 diabetes, that means that you're non-compliant or
Right.
that you weren't adhering to the protocols, so the oral medication isn't working. And what we're learning like every day, it seemingly, is that there are tons of nuances within type 2 diabetes. And we're in the midst of a series here on the podcast interviewing guests who were all misdiagnosed with type 2, and turns out that they had LADA and
Yeah.
live with really type 1. And so it takes sometimes years to really sort that out. And I think, on the back to the insulin discussion, there are people who desperately need insulin and are being told by their healthcare team that insulin means that they're failing. And so they don't want to give themselves a shot to get them back in range because they have that hanging over. And I think it's just a really damaging cycle that they get stuck in because they feel guilty for administering insulin. So they don't. And so they stay out of range. And so they stay non-compliant in the eyes of their care team.
So true. And it's such a vicious cycle. And it's the same over here as well. And so then, when insulin becomes a villain, then nobody wants insulin even as a type 1. And that's the worst narrative that we can have. Um, and I think the last bit is also just so much family and social stigma around diabetes. So whether it is, oh, just the rumors and the myths about it being contagious or it being passed down. So girls have not even girls, I think people with type 1 in India have such an issue getting married. I can't tell you how big of an issue this is. Just finding a suitable partner and getting that family to agree. It's even in the most educated families, I'm seeing this. So, yep, stigma, melting pot of stigma with type 1.
Well, thank you so much for that breakdown. I think a lot of it mirrors what we've gone through here in America, not as much of it today, but kind of where we've come from in the last 40 to 50 years in terms of education, diabetes awareness. And still we're dealing with terrible diabetes stigma, and especially, women and women of color online who just get unsolicited feedback on their life with diabetes seemingly all the
Right.
time. And, from all different angles. Jazz, I really want to ask you this question. I'm trying to do better on the podcast, asking deeper questions, of my amazing guests. And, for you, starting the Diabesties Foundation, then finding out that you have a second type of diabetes, if you could go back to, early in your life when you were first diagnosed as a young teenager, what's something that you would sneak a note to yourself and tell you about the future? Like, how would you go back in time and what would you tell yourself at 13, that you've learned since that time?
So, firstly, I want to say you're doing a great job of the questions. I
Oh, thank
must
you.
sort of applaud you. You're a great host. Um, what would I say? That's such an interesting question, actually. I just think I would sort of remind myself that you are not what happens to you. You are what you make out of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just feel like these are diagnoses at the end of the day. They are things that happen to you, but you are not what happens to you. You are what you make out of all the experiences that life gives you. And it was like a day, like I said, it was such a deja vu for me. But I think the fact that I knew that I had done type 1 diabetes for so long, that anything else would was actually a cakewalk. And I say this with like a lot of sensitivity for whoever's living out with DI. But when you've done something, and when life pushes your boundaries and it really tests you, and you've had the worst and the best experiences with that condition, you look at anything. Now I'm not scared. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I am not scared of something, because I know that it will hurt, it will break me for a bit, but I definitely will come back stronger. And that's what DI has taught me. And I just want to, like, that message just goes out saying that you are not what happens to you, you are what you make out of it. And I've tried to make some sort of a more impactful life with so much more gratitude because of my condition. So I would just tell my 13-year-old self that all's going to work out. Just keep strong, be strong, and make others strong.
Well,
Jazz, do you have space for me to be counseled by you, please?
Yeah, you've given us so much inspiration today. It's late in the day for us, and you're just getting started, and you're like, I'm filled up. I could run through a brick wall right now.
Same. I'm gonna hit these Puerto Rico.
You guys are too nice.
Jazz Sethi in my soul.
Yeah, I feel, we've never met. You and Eritrea got to meet it, and I'm honestly really jealous of that now. But hopefully we'll run into each other in person in the future. But I just feel so aligned with the way that you're thinking about helping people in India with diabetes, and really people across the world. We need more people like you leading the way. And really, like, everything that you've said. First of all, you're the first person to say bifurcated on the podcast. So I'll send you your trophy. I'll send you your trophy in the mail. But I mean, just hearing you speak so passionately and eloquently about people with diabetes and helping people with diabetes really, just makes me feel like there is hope for a person who's diagnosed today in India, because they've got Diabesties and the Diabesties Foundation waiting for them to help them out. So thank you for all that you're doing for people with diabetes, and I hope we get to meet someday.
Absolutely. I invite both of you to come to India. Please do come visit our center.
I'm saying that.
Otherwise, I will come and pick you up at the airport. Just come. I'll definitely try and meet you guys when I'm in the US next, for sure. We should try to catch up.
Definitely. But in the meantime, where can our listeners find you? I know we're going to include links to your website and social media in the show notes, but go ahead and plug yourself. Like, where can our listeners get in touch with you in the Diabesties Foundation?
Yeah, I think so. Our website is diabesties.foundation, and all our social media is Diabesties1. So come along, say hi, and would love to connect with all of you. And thank you so much for this invite. It's been such a pleasure talking to both of you, and I'm so grateful that you had the time to accommodate me in the show. And I definitely am very excited to meet you guys soon.
Well, the pleasure is all ours, and thank you so much for your time.